Hello there, Josie here, your separation survival specialist. You know, life can throw you some unexpected curveballs, like an unwanted separation, and it might make you feel like you're all alone, but you're not. Join me on my podcast, Heavy Pages, A Separation Journey, where we'll navigate these twists and turns together. It'll be like having a friend by your side who totally gets it. On our episodes, we explore real stories, expert insights, and practical tips to help you find your inner strength, rebuild your life, and discover a path forward filled with hope. It's all about rewriting your story, embracing change, and empowering you. So subscribe to the Heavy Pages on your favorite podcast app, and let's turn those pages of transformation together. I can't wait to connect with you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the It Hurts to Mom podcast. I'm Lauren Rose, and today we're talking about the three most important things that positive psychology, aka the science of happiness, says will lead to a satisfying life. That is, what makes happy people happy. Our guest is Reneau Peurifoy. He spent 2 decades as a therapist and teacher and is the author of multiple books, including Anxiety, Phobias, and Panic, Taking Charge and Conquering Fear, Overcoming Anxiety from Short-Term Fixes to Long-Term Recovery, Anger, Taming the Beast, and his most recent, Why You Feel the Way You Do. He's also developed a YouTube channel that features videos on practical life skills. Thank you so much for coming on. I think this is a really interesting topic.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's just a pleasure to be here.
So first, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you're qualified to discuss, this subject?
Well, actually, it's interesting because my original degrees were in biology with math and science chemistry. So I was always interested. I was always interested in behavior and did a lot of training animals and stuff when I was little. My parents came from farming background, so we had chickens and rabbits and dogs and cats and a parrot and all kinds of crazy stuff. And I was at 4-H, so we raised different stuff for that. And just animal behaviors have fascinated me all the time. And I switched, I had a friend that was a counselor, and I've always liked helping people. So I decided to switch into working with people. And so I got my master's in counseling and specialized in actually anxiety disorders. At the time, that was kind of a new thing. And when you go into private practice, you're always looking around for a niche that is not filled. I knew I didn't want to go into substance abuse and some of those types of things. So I liked anxiety disorders because you get success, and I like success. So the rest is kind of history. California is really hard to do private practice in. My kids were getting ready to go into college and needed to support them. So I moved out of private practice into teaching, and that's kind of where I wrapped up.
I'm going to read some of your books because I have terrible anxiety. And I mean, I'm in therapy, but I still can't seem to get under control. So I look forward to reading your books on anxiety.
You know, one of the things that I found with when you work with people with panic disorder and things that are similar to that is everything in human beings exists over a normal curve. You know, some people are tall, some people are short, and there's an average height, right? The same thing is true for your nervous system. Some people have just really reactive nervous systems, and some people you gotta slap them upside the head to get them to notice something. You know, on the positive side, and this is something I always try to emphasize, is the people I worked with were very intuitive, and that reactive nervous system that they had was actually the quality that other people liked about them because they read people really well. You know, they tend to be very sensitive people. And the hard thing to come to terms with is the fact that you're a sensitive person in a world of insensitive clods. So once you get that down, that everybody else is not as sensitive, or most people are not as sensitive as I am, then that helps you deal with a lot of stuff. And the analogy I used to use a lot was it's kind of like a house where the wiring's not quite up to code, and you plug too many things in, the circuit breakers trip, and essentially that's the type of body you're dealing with. And so once you understand that, you find that, stress management and being in tune with when you've done too much and taking care of yourself at those times becomes super, super, super important. Because a lot of the clients I had, they didn't realize that they were stressed out until they were having panic attacks and, they were having major symptoms and stuff. So that idea of, pacing yourself, being in tune with what's good for you, what's not good for you, and just that self-care becomes just such an important thing to do.
Thank you. I think I am definitely a very sensitive person. So is my daughter, and she's got really
Oh
bad
yeah.
anxiety. And I've kind of thought of, as far as my daughter goes, is that's her superpower. She's sensitive
Oh yeah.
in both the positive and the negative ways.
Yep.
So she's got the whole spectrum, but definitely look forward to reading those.
I might add that there was something I was really big on was normalizing yourself, uh,
Hmm.
realizing that this is just a normal variation because we start to live out our diagnoses, right?
Hmm.
One of the things that just was near and dear to my heart was at one of the conferences, a bunch of people from a self-help group that were using my book, they came and they all had these badges that said, so I'm anxious. And as they were talking, they'd say things like, "Well, I've got a presentation tomorrow. Probably won't sleep tonight, but I'll sleep good the next night." That they'd gotten into that idea that this is kind of the way I am, and so I just manage it. I don't have to make a big deal out of it. I know I'm not going to sleep. I know I'm going to be anxious ahead of time, but I'll do okay. And afterwards, I'll settle down. I'll get a good night's sleep, have a nice meal, and just how I exist in the world.
That makes sense, trying
Yeah,
to accept it, but as also not making it your identity. Because yeah, we
exactly.
can people with chronic pain, chronic illnesses, any kind of major diagnosis, that's a lot of people, for including me, that's been a struggle, right?
Right.
So, I think that's great.
Okay.
So, let's talk about the science of happiness. What exactly does that mean?
Well, it actually kicked off around 2000. There was a big presentation in 1999 at the American Psychological Association, and the president said, we've been spending a couple decades working on, you know, dysfunction and illness. We should put more effort into, what makes people happy in life and what are the positive sides of psychology. And now there's just a lot of research that's been done over the last 20 years or so into things that create happiness in a person and make for a satisfied life. And the three big ones, the first one above everything else, most people can guess it's relationship. We are
Mhm.
wired for relationship. When you look at the emotional circuits in the brain that we share with our pets and other animals and stuff, a lot of them have to do with connecting with people, the caring circuit, the circuit that makes us sad when people are going away, the play circuit, all this type of stuff uh, is designed to tie us in with other people. And that's one of the things that's lacking a lot today is people are so isolated. You leave, you got your little garage door opener, you shut it, you got your earphones on, or your earbuds, and you go to work, you're in your little cubicle, you're doing something isolated, or you're working out at home isolated. You come back and you may go the whole day without seeing anybody, outside of your immediate families. If you have children, your children. And that's not healthy. People used to have a lot of interconnection, a lot of people they would talk to. You had your small village or your small town community or your block in the city, and you knew everybody. Everybody knew you. If you had something bothering you, you had an uncle, an aunt, or the older person or your friend that you go talk to about it. People don't have that nowadays. In a lot of ways, a therapist oftentimes is just a paid Frid who will sit there and listen to you and really understand you at a deep level. And so if you have three or four people like that, usually you don't have to worry too much about your mental health. But like I said, a lot of people don't have that. So that's the big one. And I think with kids and children, that's an important thing for parenting. We just mentioned that briefly earlier. Uh, if you want to be a successful parent, the key is relationship. I've seen people who have terrible parenting, quote, techniques, but they had just a wonderful relationship with their children and they came out fine. And I've seen parents who are doing things by the book and but they didn't have much of a relationship because they were busy or this or that. And those children struggled when they hit junior high, high school, because you can, and if you are using the power approach, that works when they're younger, but at some point in time they realize you can't make me. And when they get that point, you can't make me. And then if you don't have a relationship, you're in deep doo-doo. So relationship is important, taking time to just be with them, because you can't have a relationship without time. I know when I was doing parenting classes, talking about taking special time, especially with younger kids, was so important, and labeling it. Because then they would come and they'd say, "Hey, Dad, when's my special time?" And you could say, "Well, I gotta work with the washing machine here. I got some, or I got to work with, the computer or whatever." Because I did a lot of childcare, because I did a lot of work out from the home when they were younger. Uh, that's just something that makes things so much easier when they get older, because now they buy you as a consultant. And if they don't buy you as a consultant, they're going to go to the other kids, and a lot of times kids that you don't want. So that's the big one, is relationship.
So I have a question about the relationship one. So is there a caveat when it comes to relationships where, because like, let's talk about unhealthy relationships, because I've had toxic relationships and they were so unhealthy that it affected my mental health.
Right.
So how do toxic relationships kind of play into happiness?
You talk about it in a person's past, right? So,
Well, even in their present.
well, yeah,
So
if you've had them in the past, you tend to carry that forward. It's interesting how that works. When you deal with singles that have gone through a whole bunch of bad relationships, um, they tend to select poorly. And it's not that they're consciously doing this. And this is super important to understand, is that just like your pets, people, you read other people's facial expressions and their body language, and there's a subconscious part of you that's reading that and interpreting that through your past experience. So if you've had a negative background, you go into relationships with blinders on. There's a lot of things you don't pick up on early on that somebody from a healthy background with positive stuff and with their parents and stuff, they'll just pick up on that. They'll notice these things, and so that's why you can take somebody. Let's take a gal who goes into a room with 15, 20 guys, and within 15, 20 minutes, she'll be talking to the guys that come from bad backgrounds, because she gets around the people from healthy backgrounds, and without even realizing it, they've got appropriate limits, they've got appropriate disclosure, all that type of stuff. And at some level, that's uncomfortable. Don't know how to deal with this. But the people that come from similar backgrounds, they're giving off the vibes, if you will, the body language, all that type of stuff, that, okay, this feels familiar. And again, at this point, everybody's presenting well, right? So you don't find out the downside until downstream a little ways. And so one of the things that's really important, I find, is to identify some healthy people and hang around them. And I know when I've told people to do this, we'll talk about, so I've got a big list in the book about, what constitutes a healthy family, being safe, having things that you say not be used against you, stuff like that. When they first hang around people that they've identified as coming from good backgrounds and that are reasonably healthy, the complaint is usually the same. These people are so boring. There's absolutely no drama in their life. And if they could just stay with it for a while, one of the things they find over time is, this is really comfortable. Because a lot of times when you come from a really chaotic background, you don't the sensation of peace is difficult. It's like with working with panic disorder. One of the things I would do is I would use relaxation response cassettes that they would take home. Well, people nowadays don't understand. I use MP3s nowadays. And the sensation of being relaxed was, for some at first, very uncomfortable, because they just didn't know that was an unfamiliar sensation to them. So being secure in a relationship with somebody else is sometimes uncomfortable at first, but if you can hang in there and hang around them, pretty soon that inner wiring will respond to it, and you find, hey, I like this, and I like this more than the chaos. The chaos, I never really liked it, but it was familiar, and it's what I knew. This really was unfamiliar at first, but now that I'm getting familiar with it, it feels good. I like it. So that's part of how you kind of rewire from the inside out. There's this kind of idea that you read a book, you get some information, and now everything's going to be okay. And insight is important to understand why is important, but we are experiential beings. We need to experience things in order for our wiring, if you will, to reset.
So what about, let's say, a a woman who is in a marriage, and we won't go so far as saying he's abusive, but maybe her husband is controlling and manipulative and gets angry all the time, and
Yeah.
it is a toxic relationship. Is it possible for her to create other healthy relationships and therefore, end up being happy and having a satisfied life?
Well, if you know, if the husband is not too out of line, yeah. And generally speaking, even in good marriages, your mate is not going to satisfy all your needs. And
Good
that's when I
point.
think one of the myths that oftentimes people go into marriage. Well, I'm going to go into this marriage, and I'm going to or this relationship, and I'm going to stay here as long as you make me happy, and as long as that, when that ends, then I'm going to move on to something else. People go in even with that expectation nowadays. So even in good relationships, your partner is not going to satisfy everything, and what happens is relationships go through a cycle. You have that honeymoon stage, and actually when you do MRIs, you find the frontal lobe shut off more so in women than in men. And so that thinking part, so this idea that love is blind, you've got the rose
Mhm.
colored glasses, really there's physiology to it. In fact, one of the things that I really, really recommend to single women is do not get into a sexual relationship until you've had time to evaluate the guy. And that's another mistake that is so common nowadays. You get
Mhm.
into the relationship, you get that infatuation, you start having the bonding going on, and then the rational part kicks in, and you look and you say, "Oh my gosh, what have I got into?" Uh, so you have the kind of honeymoon stage, and then you have kind of the rule negotiation stage. That's when you start to realize this person's not quite right. Who's going to turn down the heat at night? Where do we put the forks?
Mhm.
How do we do this or that? And that sometimes people negotiate fairly easily if they've got negotiation skills. Sometimes you go into trench warfare for years over those
Mhm.
types of things, sometimes the rest of your life. But if you can get through that, then you start to settle down into some real intimacy. And intimacy is different from infatuation. It's being safe with a person, knowing that you can count on them, knowing that they will not intentionally do anything to harm you, and having demonstrated that, as they say nowadays, they got your back. So these types of things, and that's when relationships are pretty good. I mean, I'm going to be 50 years next year, so uh, we've been through the cycle a few times as we've got through
Yeah.
the years.
Oh,
And I think if you have the commitment to make it well, make it work, and if you have somebody who has the capacity, that's the other thing. When I work with singles, I always say you need to evaluate, does this person have the capacity for intimacy?
mm,
Not everybody does. If you're in a relationship with somebody like that, then you've got a decision to make. Can you find and those things you need outside of the marriage, and satisfy it that way through girlfriends or activities or other things? And if that's okay for you, fine. And if it's just not possible and everything's just too chaotic, then maybe it's time to move on to something else.
okay, that makes sense. Congratulations, by the way, on your
Yeah.
your 50 years. That's
Yeah.
that's fantastic. All right, so what's the next item?
Purpose. So after you
Yeah,
have relationship, you
yes.
have to have reason to get up in the morning, right? And purpose can be big or small, and it ties into the third one, which is meaning. And meaning has to do with the big questions. What's life all about? Is there life after death? Is there a God? Is there not a God? These types of things. And so some people, their purpose is small. My purpose is just to make the most widgets I can, or my purpose is just to get my kids, raise my kids. Of course, when they're gone, I no longer have purpose, right? So I have to reinvent myself. If your purpose is bigger, such as like I want to help people, or I want to create something that's going to, be useful for other moms, like what you're doing, those types of things are good. And then meaning, the answer to those big questions, that's what helps you get through the hard times in life. When somebody dies, when you have a catastrophic illness or chronic pain or other things, how do I give a context to that that's going to be meaningful to me in life? When I talk about that part, we live in a culture that's very materialistic. We have a very the idea that we're just little machines, and when I'm dead, it's all over. And if that's your philosophy, of course, the goal is to get as much as you can right here and now. And I oftentimes like people to take a look at some of the near-death experience research that's gone on. Moody did a kind of a groundbreaking book in the, I think it was the late 70s, Life After Life. And since then, there's been a lot of research into near-death experiences. And in the book, my book, current one, I've got a report by a group that worked with a lot of them. And these are very scientific, and they concluded that there's no way for us to explain this through traditional science. All of the theories about the dying brain and the chemicals going off and this and that, none of that stuff works. There's no brain activity in a lot of these individuals. There's no heartbeat, and yet they're reporting things that are going on in the operating room. They're reporting things in the next room. They're reporting things miles away. Many times you can go and actually get third-party confirmation that these things happen. We have no, and of course their conclusion is we have no explanation for this. I believe there's a spiritual side to life, and I think that's
Right.
a heavy indicator for it. What you do with that, of course, whether you go into some kind of traditional religion or some other type of spiritual, or if you want to be non-religious, existential explanation, I think that needs to be part of your meaning, because then that gives a context that's more than just here and now, and it helps again to take you through those hard times in life. So relationship, purpose, and meaning, those are the three big ones, and those are what you want to give your children.
I think they're absolutely spot on. So a few years ago, when I had to stop working because of my chronic pain, I went
Yeah.
into a really deep depression, a real grieving process, because I
Oh
felt like
yeah.
I'd lost my purpose in life.
Right.
And what changed was I realized that, I am a spiritual person. So I realized God could take what I thought was my broken life
Right.
and make something new and beautiful out of it. So, my new purpose is helping other people with chronic pain, and, meaning, I think that the meaning behind my chronic pain is coming from God. So I think these are fantastic and they make perfect sense. And, you
Mhm.
didn't put things that make people happy are having a lot of money or a lot of, like achievement kinds of things,
Yeah.
or so I think these are very, accurate, and they make perfect sense.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of times the research focuses on little things like being thankful or doing something nice
Mhm.
for other people, things like that. And all these things do boost happiness. And it's interesting that people that have that spiritual side tend to do those things naturally, which is why in surveys they tend to be happier than people that are more materialistic.
So what else do you cover in your new book?
Well, it actually takes the reader through a journey through four sections. The first part is I talk about emotions. What are they? Why do we have them? And then I use that to talk about triggers, and then it's something that's called core response patterns, both positive and negative. And then the last section is what we've been talking about, the science of happiness. Yeah, I've just always been fascinated with emotions. When I was in high school,
Hmm.
my sophomore year, my nickname was Mr. Spock. Star Trek had come out, and so I was Mr.
Yeah.
Science.
And so now you're Mr. what? Mr. Emotions, Mr. Dr.
Well,
Bones.
it's funny because I play guitar, and so in college, I got into when I was in high school, I was playing like Elizabethan lute music and classical stuff. But in college, I got into the blues, and so B.B. King and those type of people. And so in that era, it was all about feeling, right? So it's almost
Mm,
like I went 180 degrees the other way. So hopefully I've
exactly.
been finding some kind of a balance between those two over the time. So
No, that's really cool. And I think that emotions are a really important topic. So I definitely am gonna read your new book as well, because I love talking about emotions and learning about emotions and the process of an emotion and how it relates to your thoughts and your behaviors and all of those kinds of
yeah.
things. So
Well, maybe we could touch upon that just briefly.
sure.
Neurobiologists, and a lot of this research has been done over the last 20 years or so. It's fairly new over the last decade. Uh, a lot of psychologists felt like animals and stuff did not have emotions, and now they've found we have basically seven circuits that we share with your pets and all other mammals. And neurobiologists call them affects. And so affects are something that drive you. They make you get up and do something. And the simplest ones are heat, cold, pressure. If I'm really cold, I get real motivated to find someplace warm. The next set are what they call the homeostatic affects, and these are things that help you. Homeostasis is just a big fancy word to keeping balance in your body. And these are the things that drive you to do things to keep your body in balance. The two big ones, of course, hunger and thirst. If the
Yeah.
thirstier I get, the more drive I have to find something to drink, and the same thing with hunger. On top of that are the higher emotions, the things that we usually think of as emotions. And the two interesting ones are seeking and play. All mammals have this circuit that causes you to want to explore your environment. You see this in babies. They're out there crawling around, they're putting everything in their mouth, they're touching everything. And even as adults, I go to a new situation, and the first thing I do, like a new room or auditorium or someplace, is I look around, I just check everything out. And it's a drive to kind of see what's out there. Is it safe? Is it not safe? Is there some positive stuff out there? Part of why we like hobbies, we like to do new things, because again, that's that seeking thing is driving that. And the play circuit is really interesting because that's how we learn social limits as children. We do too much in our play, and then we're told, back off, that's not okay. You can only poke the gorilla so many times before he responds. And even as adult, that circuit is so active in us. We like to play, and it causes that interaction that we have with people. We like to joke, we like to, and do things that are enjoyable with one another. And then there's two fear circuits. I'll mention lust. Lust kicks in during adolescence. We all know about that, so don't need to talk too much about it. And then there's the two fear circuits, danger, and then the other one is they call panic, but we know it more as parents as separation anxiety. You see it in children. When the parent is absent, then they become really anxious. And then there's a corresponding caring circuit, which causes you to respond to that distress that you see. And that as adults, because all this stuff gets filtered up through your higher brain, and it gets modified by your belief systems and your experiences, because the higher brain is the executive, but it's that intertwining between the two changes a lot in humans because we think so much. We have such a big thinking part of our brain. So that's what causes us to miss people when they're away, or things that we've identified as important, why we miss them, is that panic circuit. And then the caring circuit, of course, oxytocin is one of the things that, the love hormone is one of the things that mediates that. It helps to bond us. So, and then of course, anger circuit is the other one. And anger is one of the two responses to threat. When you are threatened, you either become angry or you become afraid. Anger can range from irritation to rage, and fear can range from just apprehension to panic. And so, depending upon how I judge the threat, if the threat is manageable, I become angry. If the threat is unmanageable, I become frightened and want to get away from it. And of course, a lot of times we're not sure, so we can have a mixture of those two things going on. It's interesting that we process a lot of these emotions on different parts of the brain, which is why we can have mixed emotions over different things. So that, in a nutshell, is emotions. We share those with our animals, and really easy to understand when you really understand their function in your life. In fact, when you're in therapy, you just work backwards. Person is feeling anxiety. Okay, so there's a threat. Let's identify the threat and decide what to do about it. Or anger, same thing. Where's the threat, and what do we do about it? And sometimes there's not an easy answer, as you know, especially dealing with something like chronic pain, which is a ongoing threat, to all kinds of things in your life. And figuring out how to manage that in a way where it's less threatening to you becomes a it's a work that continues.
Absolutely. I think those are really interesting. And it's interesting to learn how your brain how your brain processes emotions. So I think you've definitely proven that you know your stuff. So I think everybody should go out and read any of your books that speak to them. So where can we find more information about you and about your books?
Easiest place is to go to whyemotions.com. That's whyemotions.com. That's my website, and you can get links into the books. It's in paperback, ebook, and audio. And then you can also get links over to my YouTube channel, where I've got a bunch of things there that I've done, and I've got some free downloads. In fact, one of the fun ones is the pregnancy trigger response pattern that my wife used. It's just a relaxation response, and then we did a trigger on her shoulder and knee, so that when I would touch those and say relax, she would relax. So after the contraction, I would just say, okay, relax, dear. Gynecologist said, the first one with our first child, does this stuff work? I said, sure, just watch, and then and touch it, and then she'd just be very relaxed, very loose arms and stuff. So that kind of helps with speed things along a little bit better.
That's great. I can't wait to go to your website and see what freebies you have.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. This has been really helpful.
Well, it's been good being here. I've enjoyed talking with you, so thank you.
Thank you. Everybody, make sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any health, parenting, or life advice. For my freebie, 30 Ways to Relieve Pain Without Taking a Pill, go to ithurtstomom.com/tips. Or if you have any comments, suggestions, or want to be on this podcast, please email me at ithurtstomom@gmail.com. I wish everybody a blessed and pain-free